Okay, it is time to talk about something so boring, yet so important. It's called OSHA and infection control. OSHA is training that you will get at every one of your jobs. At my doctor's office, I used to sleep through the training because it is horrifically boring, but it all ties together with keeping you safe in the workplace. So Chapter 17 finally goes into OSHA more so. OSHA was talked about in all these other little chapters, and now Chapter 17 finally talks about OSHA. So what I decided to do was combine OSHA with infection control. And just some very basic infection control stuff. This would definitely be a PowerPoint to put in your board's binder. You do have this digitally, and if you don't already, you will have a physical handout of this. But infection control is going to be something that is so incredibly important through the rest of your program here. And your dental teachers will keep instructing you on proper infection control. So I'm just going to give you a glimmer of some of that stuff. But I'll handle the boring OSHA part. So OSHA stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and you might have heard of OSHA before. But basically, they're the people who make sure and set regulations of how people can stay safe while they're at their jobs. So this actually started in the 70s, 1971 to be exact. And President Nixon was the one who was really behind getting OSHA up and running, because prior to that there was no set of standards to keep people safe. So just like before HIPAA there was no way to keep records safe, before OSHA in 1971 there was no way to keep people safe at their jobs. 15 people die every day from work-related injuries, which is about 5,600 Americans per year, which is ridiculous. Every single day, 15 people die from a work-related injury. So, for example, one of the teachers who used to work here, her now husband was working for the Yingling Brewing Factory, and he was standing on a riser, and he was supposed to have like a belt that hooked him to the kind of scaffolding he was standing on, but the office didn't supply it for him, and he wasn't wearing it because they didn't give it to him, and he didn't have it, and he fell. And he fell, and he fell, and he fell. He fell about 40 feet, landed on his back. Thank God he was okay. But that's an example of someone getting hurt at work. One of my friends was working machinery, and if you ever saw Who Framed Roger Rabbit, at the very end, there's like this roller that the bad guy gets dipped into and rolled through. That was the kind of a machine that my friend was operating, and his pant leg got stuck in the machine, and the emergency stop button did not work, and he was sucked through that machine and killed. So this is real. Even though about 5,600 Americans die every year, more than 4 million people are hurt at work, and it's not fatal. So remember when I told you about dropping my hand, or dropping the water jug on my hand at work? That's considered a workplace injury. So I fell into that more than 4 million. Yes, you need to know these numbers. So, why do you care? You care because the point behind OSHA is if you take a proactive approach and you put things in place so that people don't get hurt, then people won't get hurt. So you want to do this before someone gets hurt as opposed to afterwards. So there are a ton of precautions that are put into place both in clinic and in your jobs when you get there that are super, super important. So here are some things that you need to know. At any job under OSHA, you absolutely have the right to get training, even though it's really boring. You are allowed to file a complaint to OSHA against your workplace if there's an OSHA violation, and you cannot be retaliated against. So if you're working at Dr. Hamburger's office and he leaves all of his outlets uncovered, and so a kid could shock themselves, and there are wires everywhere that you could trip over, you can report Dr. Hamburger to OSHA, and Dr. Hamburger is not allowed to fire you or do anything to retaliate against you without further punishment from OSHA. So OSHA is a government thing. So the idea behind it is to keep you safe. So you're supposed to also know what hazardous chemicals are in your office, where they are, what kinds of injuries you could have from these chemicals, how to treat any contact with these chemicals, and what makes an unsafe workplace, I guess. So, if you still don't care, you need to. So the chart on the bottom shows OSHA penalties. The blue ones are ones that are over $100,000 in penalties. The red ones, so in 2010 there were 18 cases where the penalties for OSHA violations were more than $1 million. So I have no idea where those 14 extra violations came from 2009 to 2010. So violating OSHA is a really big deal for offices. So if your office had to pay out one of those $1 million penalties, do you think your office would still be running and you would have a job? Probably not. So these are some charts that I found interesting. No, you don't have to memorize all the prices on here. But just by the facility type, these statistics are from 2010. Dental offices made up $40,000 worth of fines for OSHA violations. Nursing homes and personal care facilities where your relatives might be living were nearly $350,000 in OSHA violations. So just medically speaking, in 2010, OSHA issued $708,000 in violations. And OSHA applies to any occupation, not just medical. So like I told you about the Yuengling Brewery, OSHA applies to every single type of occupation, not just healthcare. So if you've ever driven by a plant and you've seen one of those things that says, hey, we've gone 3 days without a lost time accident, that's an OSHA thing. So now this is just dental offices only. These are the top 7 most expensive penalties that I thought was interesting. So the most expensive one is red, which is hand protection, meaning people did not wear gloves. Ew. So all that schmutz is on your hands. No, I'm wrong. The most expensive one is the light blue one, which is bloodborne pathogens, which we're going to be getting into in a minute. Then it was hand protection, which is pretty gross. So you don't have gloves on, the schmutz is on your hands, you run it through your hair, you scratch your eye. Ew. The following year, for 2011, the most expensive OSHA citations, again, we're in this light blue, were general machine requirements. So, did people run spore tests on the sterilizers? If you think of the Mr. Thirsties, at the end of clinic, they flush out the lines because at the ends of the Mr. Thirsties, sometimes the person's spit who was in the chair before you is still stuck in there, which is really gross. So that's what this is talking about, were spore tests conducted to make sure that the sterilizers are working properly. Are there even sterilizers in the dental office? Eye and face protection. General duty is stuff that you have to do. Cover outlets, hide wires. If the floor is wet, you put up a wet floor sign so nobody falls. You put up proper signage, watch your step, things like that. So, this is just comparing 2000, FY stands for fiscal year, by the way, sorry. This just compares 2009 and 2010 of the number of citations that were issued to medical and dental practices. The light blue bar is medical and the dark blue bar is dental. So if you notice from 2009 to 10, they actually went up in medical practices and they went down in dental practices, which is great because you don't want to have OSHA violations. So, we don't want people to get hurt. So the main thing in a dental office is infection control and those super sharp instruments. So infection control is how do we prevent germs from spreading to the wrong places so that people don't get sick. You learn way more about this in Preclinic 1 and 2, so I'm only going to touch the surface of it. No pun intended. I'm not going to play this, but you have this PowerPoint digitally. I want you to watch this video. It's called If Saliva Were Red. And a lot of people have seen it before, and it shows you what it would look like if saliva were red and how much saliva gets everywhere during a typical appointment. So you watch that video. One of the first ways that we keep you protected is PPE, and you know what that is because you've been in clinic before. So that means your gloves, your masks, your eye shields, your lab coat, and the particular shoes. So when you were back in College Success and we went through the dress code, we talked about why your dress code is what it is and why you have to wear this PPE so that you don't get schmutz everywhere. Your dress code is also part of OSHA with the shoes, having your hair back, and having your piercings covered, which we talked about before you went to shadow in clinic. The idea is that you basically don't want there to be any way for any schmutz to get on you at all. Do not ever wash your gloves and reuse them. Throw them away. We have tons of them. And it is an OSHA requirement that wherever you work provides the PPE for you. So if you're working in a dental office and they don't have masks and they don't have gloves or they don't have like those a lab coat or those gowns that we provide you, if they don't provide you those things, that's illegal. You should not be buying them and bringing them in yourself. So you can report the office to OSHA. Now that's different than, like we supply face masks for you guys. We supply gloves. But sometimes students love to get their own goggles because they want fancier ones, or they choose to go get their own box of masks because they're, they have cartoon characters on them, or they really like purple gloves, so they go buy a box of purple gloves. If your office supplies it, but you still choose to go get it, that's different than you working in a place that doesn't supply it at all. So the blue barrier tape we've talked about this as well. You've seen the tape in the operatories when we've been in clinic. If hopefully you just watched that video, you saw why the blue tape needs to be everywhere. And it includes pens, laptops, your cheat sheets, everything. Cavity wipes we talked about, which are not called cavity wipes, though one of my students thought they were. It's basically like your Clorox wipe for your operatory. You have to make sure that you wear gloves when you use these because these are pretty strong. So you'll learn when you set up a unit and when you tear down a unit that you're going to wipe it down with these cavity wipes. Even the bibs that patients wear when they get x-rays get wiped down with these cavity wipes just as an extra disinfectant. Bib clips. So if you look in the bottom right corner, we use these where these are just stickies, and this is kind of like a piece of tape almost, or I can't think of what I'm trying to say, like a piece of paper. And then when the visit's over, this whole thing gets thrown away. The reason our clinic does that is because these bib clips can get schmutz on them, which when I found this out, I thought was gross. In a real office, a lot of the times they don't sterilize the bib clips, which is what this person is doing in this red thing of jelly-ish. But even though some people disinfected the bib clips, up to 70% of the bib clips still had bacteria from other patients. Some had oral bacteria, and some of them had skin bacteria from other people, which is pretty gross. So some offices have completely transitioned to the disposable ones, which is what we use in clinic. Hand washing. We talked about the importance of hand washing, and sorry, I'm chewing my cough drop. You are going to learn the proper technique for hand washing. So, especially if you want to take this picture, which I stole from the World Health Organization, and put it in your board's binder, that would be a great idea. But you washing your hands is going to be a clinic competency. So, a teacher will actually stand there and watch you wash your hands to make sure that you know how to do it right, so that you can continue on in clinic. And you have to wash your hands constantly, especially before and after you wear gloves. This is another image of how to wash your hands, but the steps are written out. It's just a little blurry to see, which I apologize for. Sterilizing. This is another way that we keep people safe and we keep people protected. So every single instrument gets sterilized. If you read this bullet point, for those of you who already know about sterilization, if you are an assistant, if you've worked there, then you know that obviously this is not the dental terminology. This is my version of it, that basically every instrument is put into a machine that kind of does a high-powered shake back and forth, so it shakes all the extra gunk off it, and then it's put in a high-temperature, high-powered kind of dishwasher to sterilize it and remove all of the bacteria. When these bags come out, they have a little circle on them that changes color to show they're sterilized. So the sterilized machines have to be tested as well to make sure that they're doing their job correctly, and that's where these spore tests come in. So the sterilizers, we got to make sure that they're working properly. And the sick part is that not a lot of dental offices do these spore tests. So we do them in the clinic constantly. How often? You will have to ask the teeth people. But we do them to make sure that all of the microscopic bacteria that could possibly be there gets killed, and that the sterilizers are working properly. So if we fail a spore test, there's a chance that the instruments that were cleaned that day weren't completely clean enough, and they might get run through the sterilizer again. Needles. When you get to local anesthesia, you guys are going to be working with needles quite a lot. And sticking yourself with needles is one of a major precaution, and is a major way that you guys can end up getting hurt. Most needles anymore are retractable, so that once they've been used, the sharp needle part gets sucked back in, so this way you don't have a chance to poke yourself. But I want you to try something and find any kind of pen or marker that has a cap, and take the cap off and place it down on a desk or something in front of you. And pause me if you need to. I want you to hold the pen, marker, or whatever in your dominant hand. And the idea is, with just your dominant hand, you need to stick the point of the pen in the cap so that you put the cap back on the marker or the pen without ever touching the cap. That's the way that you're supposed to put the cap back on a needle. And it can be difficult for a lot of people because the cap slides along the desk or whatever. Needles are thrown away differently, though. They're thrown away in what are called sharps containers, which are these red things in the upper right-hand corner. The reason for this is so that you don't throw them in the regular garbage and accidentally stick yourself. So 5% of needle sticks, it happens during recapping. Most of it is after you use the device, but before you throw it away, or during the device itself. So we saw some of those violations for OSHA, and they were bloodborne pathogens. It's because of needle sticks. 73% of them were. So if you get stuck with a needle, then that means that you have the possibility to be infected with something the patient has, or vice versa if you stick yourself first. Okay, so another precaution that OSHA does is that we have to label anything that's a potential threat. So now we start working with new labels. Your book might still be calling them MSDS sheets, but the new word for them now is SDS sheets. So what we're going to, I'll show you what these things look like in a minute, but I'm just looking to see if there's a picture of them in here for you and what they're calling them. Oh yeah, no, your book is updated, so now they're calling them the safety data sheets. Good. Basically, for every single product, every single chemical that is in the office, it needs to have one of these safety data sheets. So, the toner that is in the photocopier, the ink that's in a printer, the spray that we use to clean the dry erase boards, the dry erase markers, whiteout, liquid whiteout, and I guess the pen whiteout too, though I don't know if someone would ingest the pen whiteout. Basically what an SDS sheet is, oops, I got ahead of myself. An SDS sheet is a sheet that comes from the manufacturer that lists all the ingredients that are in that chemical, what could potentially happen to someone if they ingested it, and what to do if they ingested it. So all of these things are kept in a binder, and you do need to know where the binder is when you work in an office. So in addition to these SDS sheets, everything gets what's called a pictograph. So an oxygen tank would get one of these because it would be flammable. Hopefully you don't ever work with an exploding bomb. But you might start seeing these as you go into clinic near eye wash stations or on any of the chemicals, the Cavi wipes, stuff like that, as you're working in clinic and you're working in an office. So here's the explanation on those SDS sheets. Let's see, I mentioned the toner, I mentioned the ink. The Cavi wipes, those are chemicals. The chemicals that are used in the autoclaves, if any. Dry erase boards, dry erase markers. So here's what one of these look like. And there is a much clearer picture in your book. But basically on the left, this comes from the manufacturer of the product, and it tells you the kind of a profile of the company. It tells you potential health effects of the product, what chemicals are in it, and the percentages, what to do if it's ingested. So here's handling and storage. You need to make sure you don't put it in a hot place, things like that. This is what's kept on file. Here's a clearer version of one. See, here's the ingredients. Emergency overview, potential health effects. So this safety data sheet, if someone ingests this multi-purpose spray lubricant by accident, which is an automotive thing, we can run to the binder, we can open up this SDS sheet, and we can see what to do for them. In addition, all of the things should be labeled like this. So here's where your pictographs come into place. And here's kind of a shorter version of the SDS sheet, which also would come from the manufacturer of the item. So, even though there are all of these measures in place so that you don't get hurt, injuries are still going to happen. And according to OSHA, anytime there's been an injury at a facility, it has to be kept on record, it has to be kept on file, it has to be posted in a central location for people to see it, and you have to keep all of that on file for 5 years. So, for example, we had a disgruntled employee who called OSHA and said that we had a ton of violations, and OSHA showed up on the spot and walked through our clinic, and we had no violations, but prior to them showing up, they sent us a letter that they received a complaint. We had to have that posted. Of course, the complaint was unfounded, but we still had to follow protocol, and any incident reports of people falling or getting hurt and things like that have to be kept on record, according to OSHA. So again, like we talked about, you as an employee have the right to tell OSHA if something is wrong, and the place you work for can't retaliate against you. And based on the complaint, they'll come out and inspect the facility like I was telling you about, and they might issue fines. So this is the way they categorize issues, I guess you could say. But here's the penalties. So if it's a willful violation, so if you knowingly and intentionally left cords in the, like wires and stuff like that, in the middle of the floor, then they can charge you up to $70,000. That's such a range. It's between $5,000 and $70,000. Ridiculous. Repeated, which is all the way down at the bottom. So if you've been cited for an OSHA violation and you keep repeating it, now it's up to $70,000 for each repeated violation. A serious violation is where death or harm could result, and the employer knew. So like the example of not providing our former teacher's husband with that utility belt. That would have been a serious violation, though that's only $7,000. I don't understand how that's only worth $7,000, but wires being left out is $70,000. I don't know. Then there's the other than serious category, which is, it's not a good idea, but it probably won't kill you. And that again is up to $7,000. But it can be combined, so if you do a serious violation repeatedly, you know, it could be a $77,000 violation. So OSHA penalties are pretty stiff. And that's the end of OSHA. As you keep going, you'll hear OSHA more and more. You might see posters around offices that talk about OSHA. There's actually one in my office because there has to be one that's placed everywhere. So the OSHA poster actually that I'm looking at right now, that's in my office right next to my desk, talks about the whistleblower protection program. So again, if you tattletale on your job, you can't get in trouble. If you get hurt at work, you have to report it immediately because of OSHA. Not necessarily the workman's compensation like we talked about with the insurances, but it does tie together. And all of this stuff, OSHA is run by the U.S. Department of Labor, so that's the government entity that runs all of this stuff. So I know I threw a lot of numbers at you. This is the slide of numbers to make sure that you remember, and the different infection control procedures that we have in place, and different things that OSHA puts in place to help prevent injuries as opposed to react to them. So OSHA's boring, but it's so important. But I'm done. Aren't you happy? See you later.